Welcome to Brevis Talk. The talks you are about to hear will be honest, revealing, and unfiltered. Join us as your host, Pastor Wayne Whiteside, lifts the lid of silence and has conversations about mental illness and health in the church. The goal here is simple. It is to help someone along this journey of life who is struggling. It is to tell the truth to the unsuspecting. And it is to lighten the load of a fellow traveler. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to serve as medical advice or to replace consultation with your physician or mental health professional. If you are experiencing a medical crisis, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. Now, here's your host, Pastor Wayne.
A word of caution. The subject matter in this episode is about suicide, and many listeners may find this disturbing. Is there a genetic connection regarding suicide? Well, one way to answer this question is to say that there is definitely a genetic connection concerning major depressive disorder. So I think the answer indirectly is yes. I am not a physician or a scientist, but I have encountered numerous people over the course of 40 plus years in ministry. And depression and anxiety problems do seem to run in families. It seems that some people are much more apt to struggle with these areas of mental illness. I'm very familiar with a double tragedy that occurred in my area many years ago. I do not know all of the circumstances surrounding this tragedy, but I saw it from a not too far distance. A set of twins took their lives just a few years apart. It was awful. I knew the father of these young men. He died a few years ago, and I am absolutely convinced that the shock and heavy grief contributed to his death. The question concerning a possible genetic connection has been studied and continues to be studied. If you do any reading about this subject, you will run across terms like familial clustering and heritability. I think suicide is a much larger global problem than many realize. Over 800,000 deaths every year are attributed to suicide. Across the world, it is a plague on humanity. It hits closer to you than you might realize. Your community or neighborhood is not immune. I'm not saying these things to scare anyone or create unnecessary anxiety for anyone, but I do think we should be more educated about suicide and at least know the signs of major depression and suicidal ideation. Because this podcast wants to educate and inform, here are some warning signs from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Knowing the signs. If a person talks about killing themselves, feeling hopeless, having no reason to live, being a burden to others, feeling trapped, or having unbearable pain. Their behavior may signal risk, especially if related to a painful event, loss, or change. Increased use of alcohol or drugs, looking for a way to end their lives, such as searching online for methods, withdrawing from activities, isolating from family and friends, sleeping too much or too little, visiting or calling people to say goodbye, giving away prized possessions, aggression, or extreme fatigue. Over the years, I've spoken to several individuals who have confided in me that they were having thoughts of suicide. If anyone says something like this, please hear me. They are to be taken seriously. I wish I had known that my son was having those thoughts. We had no idea. And that is another layer in the pain of our hearts. At this point, I need to tell you that I will occasionally use the terms suicide and self-harm interchangeably. They have the same meaning when I'm speaking on this subject matter. For years, I was not able to use the word suicide in speaking about my son's death, and I still have difficulty using the word, because to me it is a very ugly word. So that's a personal viewpoint I thought might be helpful when you hear me speak on this subject. We'll continue in the next podcast. God bless you, and remember, be kind. Always be kind.
And that concludes our broadcast today. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, check us out at our Facebook page or at brevistalk.com and take a look at our blog. And remember, be kind. Always be kind.